buckets, brooks, and beating stones. It is easy, in the modern world, to forget that something as simple as clean clothing was once a difficult and laborious achievement. You turn a dial, add soap, and let a machine whirl your garments into freshness. But in the Middle Ages, the washing of clothes was not mechanical, nor was it simple. It was a task that consumed time, effort, and patience, handled most often by women whose names went unrecorded, but whose labor shaped the rhythms of village life. Let us begin at the edge of a stream. A group of women kneel on stones, garments spread out before them. Their hands are red with cold water, their knuckles raw from rubbing cloth against rough surfaces. A wooden paddle, smooth from use, rises and falls in steady rhythm, striking damp linen to loosen the dirt. The sound echoes across the meadow. Thud, splash, thud. To wash clothes was not a private act, but a communal one, carried out where water flowed freely and space allowed for spreading and drying. The tools were simple. Wooden tubs, often filled with water drawn from a well or carried from the stream. Ashes from the hearth, sifted and boiled into a weak lye, served as the basic detergent. Sometimes fuller's earth, a type of clay, was used to absorb grease from woolens. Soap, as you know it today, existed only in certain regions, often expensive and reserved for wealthier households. For most, ash and patience were the only resources available. Clothing itself was different from what you might imagine. The poor owned few garments, a wool tunic, perhaps two, a linen shirt, an apron, and a cloak. Washing was infrequent, for overuse of harsh ash could wear fabric thin. Garments were patched and repatched, stitches crossing like scars across well-used cloth. To wash was not only to clean but to inspect, to mend, to preserve a garment's life for as long as possible. The wealthy, with larger wardrobes, could afford more frequent washing and the services of laundresses. In noble households, washing was organized on a scale large enough to require servants dedicated to the task. There were, in fact, professional washerwomen, lavenders, who worked for pay. They hauled linens from castles, monasteries, and wealthy homes to the riverside. With practiced skill, they scrubbed, beat, rinsed, and spread vast sheets upon hedges or grass to whiten in the sun. These women lived on the margins of society, essential, yet seldom respected. Their work, associated with dirt and servitude, was physically exhausting and socially lowly. Yet without them, noble feasts would lack clean tablecloths, and monastic dormitories would reek of unwashed bedding. In monasteries, laundry was a matter of discipline as well as necessity. Monks and nuns followed strict rules of cleanliness, not for vanity, but for health and order. Laundry days were scheduled, clothing distributed and collected in careful rotation. The cloister might have its own washing troughs, sometimes fed by diverted streams through aqueducts. Here, silence reigned, but the rhythm of work was steady. The turning of cloth, the wringing of water, the folding of clean linen to be laid upon beds or placed in refectories. Season dictated much of the process. In winter, washing was a misery. Cold water stung hands, and drying could take days in damp air. Clothes were hung near hearths, risking smoke stains, or laid in lofts where warm air rose. In summer, however, washing could be almost pleasant. Bright sun bleached linens, breezes dried them quickly, and the act of working together at the stream became a moment of social life. Women talked, exchanged gossip, sang songs, and shared burdens. The wash site was as much a place of community as the marketplace or church. Yet the labor was unrelenting. Large items like sheets and woolen blankets required soaking in great tubs, beaten with paddles, and rinsed again and again until clear water flowed away. The strength needed was considerable, and the strain on backs and arms constant. Small wonder that washerwomen were often depicted in art with muscular forearms and weary postures. Their toil was visible in every gesture. Laundry carried moral weight as well. Clean clothing was associated with virtue and order, while filth suggested sin or disorder. Sermons compared spiritual purity to freshly washed linen. In literature, characters are sometimes described by the cleanliness of their garments, a sign of their moral state. The act of laundering, therefore, was not only practical but symbolic, a transformation of disorder into order, of uncleanness into cleanness. The setting of laundry work varied. In villages, rivers and streams provided the most common sites. In towns, communal washhouses sometimes stood near bridges or wells, their roofs offering shelter from rain. Castles often had dedicated laundries, with water piped into courtyards or drawn from cisterns. The larger the household, the more elaborate the arrangements. Yet whether in castle or village, the essentials remained the same: water, ash, cloth, and human hands. Consider, for a moment, the clothing of a medieval knight. Beneath his armor, he wore a padded gambeson, often quilted and heavy with sweat after battle or training. Such garments required regular washing lest they rot with dampness. Who tended these? Not the knight himself, but the washerwomen attached to his household or camp. Their labor ensured his comfort and health, though their names are nowhere preserved in chronicles of war. Or think of a monastery, where dozens of monks shared dormitories. Sheets, habits, towels, all required washing. Monastic records occasionally list laundresses hired to assist, women from nearby villages who entered cloisters not as nuns, but as workers. They appear briefly in ledgers. Payment to Margaret for washing linens. A life's toil reduced to a line of ink. And yet, there was dignity in the work. Washerwomen knew techniques, passed down through generations, for whitening linen, softening wool, or preserving dyes. They understood which herbs could be added to water for fragrance, which ashes made stronger lye, which stains could be coaxed out with patience. Their craft was quiet but skilled, their expertise born of endless repetition. As the sun sets on our imagined riverside, the women lift heavy wet garments from water, wring them with aching arms, and spread them across hedges. The air smells of damp cloth and ash, of soapwort and smoke. Children run nearby, helping half-heartedly, while women talk of births, marriages, and harvests. The garments, fluttering in the breeze, catch the last light of day, promising freshness for the morrow. And so we come to a question. Laundry was constant, exhausting, and essential. It shaped the daily lives of countless women, bound to rivers and washhouses. Yet in chronicles and histories, it is scarcely mentioned. Why, if cleanliness carried such weight, did those who labored to provide it remain invisible? What does this silence tell us about the way history remembers or forgets the most ordinary acts of survival? Castles, cloisters, and the hidden economy of washing. Step away from the riverside village for a moment and imagine instead the echoing halls of a medieval castle. Tapestries hang along the walls, feasts are held in the great hall, and knights march across courtyards in armor. But behind this splendor lies a world of labor, much of it invisible, much of it quiet. Among the most overlooked were those who kept clothing and linens clean: laundresses, valets, and monastic washerwomen whose work underpinned comfort and order in even the highest households. In a noble residence, washing was organized with deliberate care. The larger the castle, the more complex the system. A lord and lady, their children, retainers, guests, and servants, each produced clothing, sheets, and table linens that required tending. The sheer scale was immense. Washing days were scheduled, laundry collected and sorted, tubs filled, fires stoked for hot water, and ashes prepared for lye. Servants carried heavy bundles to laundries, often located in outer courtyards or near running water. Laundry at this level was not left to chance. Accounts from noble households reveal purchases of soap, when available, herbs for scenting, and large quantities of wood ash. Specialized laundresses, sometimes hired permanently, sometimes temporarily, formed part of the service staff. Their work was essential to maintaining the image of refinement that noble households demanded. A stained tablecloth at a feast, or a lord appearing in a soiled tunic, could suggest disorder or neglect. Cleanliness was not vanity alone, it was status. In monasteries, the scale was equally great, though organized with a different intent. Here, cleanliness was tied to discipline and spiritual order. Monastic rules required regular washing of habits, towels, and bedding. Water systems in some monasteries were ingeniously designed. Channels diverted streams into cloisters, supplying troughs for washing and drains for carrying waste away. Archaeological remains at places like Revo Abbey in England show stone-built laundries, positioned carefully so water could flow in and out with ease. Monastic laundries, however, often relied on hired women from nearby villages. Nuns might oversee the process, but heavy washing of sheets and blankets was farmed out to laborers. Records note payments to women for washing, small sums recorded among abbey accounts. These entries, though brief, remind us that even in sacred spaces, the labor of the laity sustained daily life. The monks prayed, studied, and sang, but someone had to scrub their linen. In towns, the picture broadened further. Communal washhouses appeared in some places, particularly where populations were dense. These structures, often built over streams or near wells, provided shelter for washerwomen. Inside, long troughs of water allowed many to work side by side. These were not quiet places. The thud of beating cloth, the chatter of voices, and the rush of water created a lively environment. In effect, washhouses became female social hubs, much like markets or spinning rooms. They were places where news spread, disputes arose, and networks of support were strengthened. The economy of laundry extended beyond households and communities. Soldiers on campaign needed clean garments just as much as villagers at home. Armies often moved with washerwomen, who followed camps to tend soldiers' linen. Their work, though practical, carried moral judgment in chronicles. Some writers portrayed camp laundresses as disreputable, associating them with taverns and tents rather than with labor. Yet the reality was simple. Soldiers without clean undergarments faced disease, sores, and misery. Washerwomen kept armies functioning. Washing also entered into systems of rent and service. In some manorial records, tenants were obliged to provide washing as part of their duties, alongside plowing or harvesting. A woman might be required to wash the lord's linen a set number of times each year. Payment, when given, was often in kind, bread, ale, or cloth rather than coin. Laundry was thus woven into the obligations that bound peasants to lords, another layer of unrecorded toil hidden beneath the formal structure of feudal society. There were even laws and customs regulating the work. In certain towns, laundresses formed associations to protect their trade. While not full guilds like those of weavers or tailors, these groups sometimes set prices or defended the right to work at particular sites. In Paris, for instance, washerwomen working along the Seine claimed traditional spots where they beat cloth on stones. Disputes could arise if newcomers encroached. The work was humble, but its organization still shaped urban life. Clean linen, meanwhile, served functions beyond comfort. In medicine, it was critical. Physicians recommended fresh cloths for wrapping wounds, for bandaging, and for laying under the sick. In monasteries with infirmaries, laundry was a matter of health as much as order. To neglect it was to risk infection. Thus, the laundress contributed indirectly to medieval medicine, though her role was rarely acknowledged. Let us return, then, to the image of a noble feast. The table gleams with pewter plates, bread trenchers, and pitchers of wine. Beneath them lies a spotless white tablecloth, stretched and smoothed across the board. Guests remark on the abundance of food, the richness of music, the splendor of the hall. Yet none remark on the cloth, its whiteness, its freshness, its absence of stain. That silence is the laundress's triumph, her labor unspoken but necessary. Or picture a monk entering his dormitory after a day of prayer. His bed is simple, a wooden frame, a straw mattress, a linen sheet. The sheet is freshly washed, smelling faintly of herbs boiled in with the lye. He does not think of the woman who carried, scrubbed, wrung, and dried it. Yet her work shapes his rest, his health, his ability to rise again in the night for prayer. Laundry, in this sense, was a hidden economy of cleanliness, a system that linked women at riversides, servants in castles, and laborers in cloisters into one continuous chain of toil. Its traces survive only in ledgers, in archaeological troughs, in faint mentions in chronicles. Yet its importance was vast. Without it, the fabric of daily life, literally and figuratively, would unravel. And so, a thought lingers. If castles, monasteries, and towns all relied on laundresses, what happened when they failed? What if rivers ran dry, or wars disrupted the cycles of washing? How fragile was this hidden economy, and what might its collapse have meant for those who depended on it? Cleanliness, morality, and the symbolism of washing. Imagine the slow rhythm of laundry once more, the paddle striking damp cloth, the swirl of soapy water, the spreading of white linen over hedges to dry. At first glance, it was practical work, but in the Middle Ages, practicality was never far removed from meaning. Washing clothes carried moral, spiritual, and symbolic weight. To wear clean linen was not only a matter of comfort or appearance. It spoke to the state of the soul, to virtue, and to social order. In sermons, preachers often drew comparisons between dirty garments and sinful lives. A soul weighed down by vice was like a stained shirt, disordered, unpleasant, in need of cleansing. The act of confession and penance, they said, was like laundering, ashes and water for the spirit. Just as women soaked, scrubbed, and beat cloth to restore it, so God's grace could restore the human heart. These analogies appeared again and again, familiar to anyone who had spent time at a riverside watching laundresses work. The imagery was so vivid because it was rooted in daily life. The whiteness of linen was particularly symbolic. Linen undergarments, worn closest to the body, were most often washed and whitened. Their brightness became a sign of purity. In hagiographies, stories of saints, holy figures were sometimes described as clothed in radiant white, their garments symbolizing inner sanctity. Even ordinary villagers associated white linen with virtue. A bride wearing freshly laundered garments signaled not just cleanliness, but moral worth. Yet cleanliness was not equally possible for all. The poor, owning few clothes, could not wash as frequently. Dirt became associated with poverty and, by extension, with disorder. Chronicles sometimes mocked peasants for their unwashed garments, while praising nobles for the brightness of their linen. Here, laundry reflected social hierarchy. The ability to maintain clean clothes was a marker of wealth as much as morality. Still, even the poorest tried to keep at least one garment clean for Sunday church, preserving dignity where resources were scarce. There were also connections between laundry and gender. Women were the primary washers, whether for their households or as paid laundresses. Men might assist with hauling water or chopping wood for heating, but the repetitive work of scrubbing, wringing, and drying fell to women's hands. This division reinforced cultural associations. Women were seen as responsible for order and purity within the household, just as they were expected to guard its moral reputation. A woman who failed to keep her family's linen clean might be judged as lazy or negligent. Conversely, laundresses who kept noble or monastic households in spotless linen embodied the quiet virtue of service. The symbolism extended beyond sermons into popular literature and song. Medieval fabliaux, comic tales, sometimes poked fun at washerwomen, portraying them as bawdy or shrewd, aware of gossip and secrets exchanged at the washhouse. Their work, though lowly, gave them insight into social life. To handle garments was to handle intimacy, stains, tears, and where revealed truths about households. In this way, laundresses were both invisible laborers and silent witnesses. Water itself was layered with symbolism. Baptism, the ultimate cleansing of the soul, was understood in parallel with washing cloth. Rivers where women laundered clothes became metaphors for renewal. Yet water was also treacherous. Too much rain hindered drying. Floods swept away washhouses. Just as spiritual cleansing required balance, so too did physical washing demand careful timing. Medieval people lived with these resonances, sensing meaning in every turn of the tub or strike of the paddle. Laundry even shaped festivals and customs. In some regions, communal washing was organized before major feasts such as Easter or Christmas. Clean clothes for holy days marked respect for the occasion. Parish records occasionally mention collections of linen washed for churches themselves, altar cloths, vestments, and banners. Here again, the laundress entered sacred space indirectly, her unseen work ensuring that the visible symbols of worship were spotless. In towns, washhouses became sites of reputation. Women seen working diligently were praised for their industry. But washhouses could also be sites of gossip and suspicion. Moralists warned against idle chatter among washerwomen, equating it with spreading dirty linen in public. The metaphor persists even today, airing one's dirty laundry as a symbol of shame. The origin lies in the medieval recognition that laundry was both a private necessity and a public spectacle, carried out where neighbors could see. The harshness of washing, too, carried moral undertones. Just as cloth had to be beaten, boiled, and wrung to be purified, so sinners had to endure hardship to be cleansed. The physical toil of laundresses became a living parable enacted daily across Europe. Even if the women themselves did not intend it, others saw their labor as a visible lesson in the price of purity. And yet, one wonders, how did the laundresses themselves view their work? Did they see moral symbolism in every garment? Or did they simply think of the ache in their arms and the hope for a dry day? The voices of washerwomen rarely survive, and so we are left with the interpretations of clerics, poets, and moralists. The women who labored in water and ash might not have spoken of purity and sin. They might have spoken of wages, weather, and weariness. Still, the resonance remained. Laundry, an act so ordinary, became a lens through which medieval people understood the invisible. Cleanliness and morality water and renewal, whiteness and virtue. These threads wove together into a fabric that shaped how people saw themselves and one another. But this leads to an unresolved thought. If laundry was so tied to morality and order, what happened when garments could not be kept clean, when war, famine, or poverty made washing impossible? Did society judge more harshly, or did it recognize necessity? Was dirt seen as sin, or as a mark of hardship endured? The answer may lie somewhere in the quiet tension between symbol and survival, evolution, decline, and the enduring legacy of laundry work. As we near the close of this story, picture once again the medieval laundress at her riverside. She kneels on worn stones, a wooden paddle rising and falling with steady rhythm. Around her, garments hang on hedges, spread across grass, or drape over ropes strung between trees. The work is hard, repetitive, and endless, yet it is also essential, woven into the structure of survival. From village to cloister to castle, the hum of medieval life would have been far less bearable without this constant cycle of washing. But history, like the river, flows on. The medieval world gave way to early modern change, and with it, the practice of laundry began to evolve. One of the greatest shifts was the increasing availability of soap. In the Middle Ages, true soap, made from lye and animal fat, was known in certain places but costly. Ash water remained the common detergent for most people. By the 15th and 16th centuries, however, soap production grew more widespread, particularly in Mediterranean centers like Marseilles. Soap mills churned out solid cakes, traded across Europe. Gradually, laundresses and households gained access to stronger, more effective cleaning agents. Washing no longer relied solely on ashes and patience. Chemical help arrived, easing the work slightly, though never removing the labor. Another change came with infrastructure. In many towns, communal washhouses developed into more permanent institutions. By the 16th century, purpose-built lavoirs, roofed washhouses, appeared across France, Italy, and parts of Germany. These structures sheltered laundresses from rain and provided stone basins for scrubbing. Some were funded by towns, others by wealthy patrons, but all reflected a recognition. Laundry was too vital to leave entirely to chance. Water sources were managed, basins maintained, and communal order established. The laundress's work remained grueling, but conditions improved, at least marginally. Technology, too, played its role. Wooden washboards, though not common in the medieval period, emerged later and spread through Europe. They allowed for more efficient scrubbing, reducing the need for endless beating with paddles. Buckets and tubs became sturdier, sometimes reinforced with iron hoops. Still, the essential rhythm, soak, scrub, wring, dry, remained unchanged for centuries. Laundry also retained its communal character. Washhouses continued to be social spaces, especially for women. Here, songs were sung, disputes aired, and alliances formed. Local authorities often complained about gossip, but the washhouse remained one of the few public arenas where women's voices dominated. The echoes of this communal labor linger in proverbs and songs collected centuries later, many of which trace their origins back to medieval routines. The slow transition from medieval to modern laundry also reveals a broader truth. Technological innovation did not immediately lighten the burden. Even with soap, even with washboards, the work still demanded hours of physical effort. Clothes were heavy when wet. Tubs had to be filled and emptied. Fires stoked for hot water. The first true relief came much later, with mechanized washing in the 19th century. Until then, the laundress bent over basins much as her medieval ancestors had bent over rivers. And yet, despite the weight of toil, the legacy of medieval laundry persisted in subtle but enduring ways. The association of whiteness with virtue, for example, carried forward. Linen remained the standard of cleanliness, its brightness a mark of respectability well into the modern era. The moral language of washing, the idea of cleansing sins, of airing dirty laundry, remained fixed in culture. To this day, the metaphors we use echo the rhythms of those washerwomen who once beat cloth against stones. Economically, too, laundry left its imprint. The hiring of laundresses in castles, monasteries, and armies established a precedent for paid domestic labor. Even when mechanization transformed the work, the occupation of washerwoman remained one of the most common for poor women in cities. The cycle of water, soap, and cloth created not only cleanliness but also livelihoods. Precarious, exhausting, but essential. Consider again the monastery. Its laundries may now lie in ruins, stone troughs dry and silent. Yet the practices begun there, scheduled wash days, communal systems, regulated labor, set patterns that towns later formalized. Or picture the noble feast, its spotless linens long since rotted away. The laundresses who once scrubbed them into brightness are gone, their names unrecorded, but the expectation of clean tablecloths at formal meals survives. The invisible labor became cultural memory. We might also think of the rivers themselves. For centuries, they bore the imprint of laundry. Ashes poured in, suds floating downstream, garments stretched along their banks. These waters shaped the rhythm of villages, not only as sources of drink and fishing, but as laundries for entire communities. Even today, in some rural parts of the world, riversides still echo with the same sounds: thud, splash, ring, carrying forward a lineage that connects modern lives to medieval ones. And so we come to the closing reflection. Laundry, in the medieval world, was never glamorous, rarely recorded, often dismissed. Yet without it, households would have faltered, monasteries grown foul, armies weakened, and nobles lost their shine. Its importance lay precisely in its invisibility. It sustained life quietly, faithfully, rhythmically, without demanding praise. The laundresses of the Middle Ages are gone, but their lessons remain. They remind us that history is not built only on kings and battles, but on the unseen hands that kept fabric clean, food sweet, and households in order. They teach us that even the most ordinary labor can shape culture, morality, and survival. So, imagine once more that riverside at dusk. The garments, now dry, are gathered into bundles. Women sling them over shoulders, weary but satisfied. The meadow falls quiet, save for the murmur of water. The work will return tomorrow, and the day after, and the day after that. For in laundry, there is no end, only the endless rhythm of life, preserved through the most ordinary of acts. And here is the question that lingers as the story closes. If our own comforts rest on unseen labor, machines now, people then, how much of our history, like the work of those laundresses, flows on without record, invisible yet essential?